This is my review of the brand new JBL 4309 studio monitor speakers. And these speakers are a big deal because they bring JBL's studio monitor speakers to a whole new audience because of their significantly lower price point compared to the larger studio monitors that JBL make, and the fact that they are smaller as well. And that is a big deal, providing that is what we are getting. We are not getting, say, a HDI 1600 speaker dressed up in a studio type body. And this is not going to be an average review as well, because this is one speaker of 8 that I'm comparing in a group test, and I will be comparing the 4309 to the Dynaudio EVOKE 20 and Sonus faber Sonetto II, speakers 1 and 2 in the group test. And I will compare them to a few more as well. And with that introduction out of the way, let's begin. The JBL 4309 cost £1,799, and they are a two-way studio monitor speaker that features JBL's patented HDI or high definition imaging horn technology that looks cool as hell, with a patented 1-inch Sonus diaphragm high frequency compression driver that has the funky name of 2410H-2. And it helps you have the JBL logo there, but I think you could look at this speaker with that horn and know it's a JBL and not a Klipsch, for example. And removing the grill, you can see the 6.5-inch pure pulp mid-bass driver that is ribbed for your pleasure. And there are 2 front ports. The cabinet looks simple, but it's very heavy and inert. And JBL say it's made from 3/4-inch thick panels with a lot of bracing. On the rear are dual speaker cable binding posts, which for me is the worst bit of the speaker. They are really small and fiddly, and there is a UHF level control that allows for up to 1 decibels of adjustment up and down for the treble. And the 4309 are 4 ohms, rated to 150 watts at 87 dB sensitivity with a crossover point of 1.6 kilohertz. And the crossover point is really interesting to me because I've looked at quite a few different stand mount speakers in recent months that have a low crossover point like this, such as the infamous Klipsch RP600M, but also the Anthem Argon 1 and also the Dynaudio EVOKE 10. And this is significant because it means that the tweeter is doing more of the vocal range. Before we move on, I need to thank Elite Audio UK because they are the retailer that sent me this sample to be able to do this review and include these speakers. If you're considering buying these speakers and you're in the UK, maybe give the guys at Elite Audio UK a call and consider buying from them. I think a great place to start would be with the 2 big questions I'm sure a lot of you have. Are these speakers really a studio monitor speaker, or is that snake oil to make audiophiles buy them at a premium over the HDI 1600, which is the second question. Are they really any different to the HDI 1600? Well, you can see they are very clearly a totally different speaker. And if you look at the spec sheet, there are some significant differences between them on paper. But how different they really are, I will definitely cover in the upcoming HDI 1600 review. But the question of, are the 4309 really a studio monitor speaker, needs to start with a definition. What is a studio monitor speaker? And according to Neumann, they say that a studio monitor is a speaker that gives you the plain truth, that adds no extra sugar and hides no imperfection. And they say most hi-fi speakers boost bottom end and raise treble, resulting in a smiley curve that makes music sound more powerful and crisp. Well, that last kind of claim from Neumann I think is bullshit, to be honest. But I think what we can take from the rest of what they're saying is that a studio monitor speaker is probably a speaker that has a very flat frequency response from a very high frequency down to a very deep frequency. So is that what the JBL 4309 are giving us? Well, I measured them as part of a full Dirac Live calibration, and this is the result. While that might not look like it to an untrained eye, trust me, that is an extremely flat in-room frequency response. In fact, from 1 kilohertz and up, that is the most extended and flattest frequency response of all the speakers I have reviewed and measured. But it's not perfect. As you can see, there is a slight dip in the response in the crossover region, although it's so small that you probably wouldn't hear it. And there is a slight rise around 1 kilohertz, which can actually make vocals pop more. The bit that's not ideal for me is the reducing lower mid-range around 500 Hz. And some of this could be the speaker's placement in my room. Maybe I'm getting some cancellation, but it's probably the speaker. Maybe it's there in case you use them sat on a mixing desk and you get a boost in that region. I think that's possible. But I think you can see what the design goal is here, to give you as flat as possible in-room response. How does this compare to hi-fi speakers? Well, this is how it compares to the KEF LS50 Meta, another speaker that measures extremely linear and is considered as a monitor speaker. And you can see it's close. The Metas are better in the lower mid-range, but they roll off earlier in the treble and have a dip in the presence region. How about the Amphium Argon 1, a speaker from a Studio Heritage manufacturer that also has a low crossover point? Now this is closer, and again the Amphium are better in the lower mid-range, but they roll off much earlier in the treble too. What about the Dynaudio EVOKE 10? Again, another very low crossover two-way speaker from a Studio Heritage manufacturer. Well, you can see a mixture here of all of them really, early roll off in the treble, a presence region dip, and a recessed lower mid-range. If we compare the JBL 4309 to the other two speakers in this group test, so far you can see neither the EVOKE 20 or the Sonetto II measure anything like as flat and as extended. In fact, above 1 kHz, they are really very impressive. And that shows the power of the HDI horn compression driver and how well that works. So I think it's fair to say that with the 4309, in terms of giving us a studio monitor speaker, JBL have nailed it. Quick word on setup. In the manual, it suggests you to keep the 4309 up to about 8 feet apart before you start any toe-in adjustment. And they were about 2 meters apart in my room. So I had them facing fairly straight on, toed in just a little bit. But more important, I found, was getting time alignment just right. Let's talk about sound quality. And surely at this point I should be saying cut the video, cut the review, and cut the Pursuit of Perfect System channel, because this is it. Surely this is the perfect speaker, a speaker that measures this well. That is it. The pursuit is over. And if only it was that simple. If it was that simple, you know, the speaker market would be like this and not infinite as it is today. And I'm sure there are lots of speakers out there that don't measure as flat as the 4309 for technical limitation reasons, but I know there's a lot of speakers out there that don't measure flat like this deliberately on purpose, and that is because of psychoacoustics, you know, how we perceive sound, such as having a dip in the presence region makes vocals sound more recessed, which helps to create space in the soundstage, which helps to give you a more look onto type of sound, such as having treble that rolls off a little bit earlier makes speakers sound a bit more pleasing and pleasant, especially with less well-produced music. Having, you know, a slight rise in the lower mid-range helps to flesh out and full out vocals, and definitely having more bass makes the overall whole sound more pleasing, and I think much better to listen to. And a totally flat frequency response is not naturally the most pleasing of sounds for a speaker, because it can sound very vivid, and depending on the music it can sound very wall of sound rather than creating deeper layers. Not always, but it can, I think, more so than different designs will. And you could say that this is an intended characterless design for a speaker, and I think that's correct, but not necessarily 100% the case with the 4309. But still, I feel like the character of sound that you feed into them definitely becomes more important, and that is definitely something else to consider. My biggest fear with a speaker like this that uses a horn and a low crossover point is that vocals are presented a little weird, like with the Klipsch RP600M. Those are speakers that definitely sound like they would benefit from a dedicated mid-range driver. But I'm really glad to report that this is not the case here with the 4309. I was able to get a really nicely saturated vocal that sounded correct for tonality and very solid in the center for imaging, and it shows an excellent integration between the horn and the mid-range driver, and this really impressed me. You also might think that, wow, with that horn the treble is going to be wild lively, but it's not at all. It's balanced really well for its delivery, a nice balance of lively, dynamic and controlled. And obviously you can turn it up or down, but I didn't like the treble at all with either adjustment. For me, 0 dB was right, but your mileage may well vary, and it's nice to have some level of sound control. Bass was good for a stand mount speaker, not quite as insightful as the best in class, and not best in class for output and extension, but it was about where I expected it to be based on the measurements. I would definitely prefer more bass output, but my expectations are probably a little more than most, I feel, in that regard. Typical hi-fi soundstaging is not where the 4309 shine. They shine more with dynamics rather than spacing music out in front of you, trying to trick you into maybe hearing and seeing a make-believe audio wonderland, which might rule them out for some audiophiles, or maybe I just didn't have the right hi-fi system for them. And that's definitely something that I'm thinking is probably the case, because I've deliberately chosen for this group test to have as neutral a system as possible, so a really neutral digital front end and a really neutral amplifier. And I'm thinking that maybe if I had, a system that had more character, then I would be able to get more out of the 4309 in terms of soundstage, and probably more out of them in other areas as well. But what about comparisons? How do the 4309 sound compared to the Dynaudio EVOKE 20 and Sonus faber Sonetto II? Well, interestingly, I would say they sit nicely in the middle of the two, but overall they are more like the EVOKE 20 in terms of being direct and upfront sounding, but more extended in the treble, but less extended and full in the bass. They share the same lively or alive character that the EVOKE 20 have, but they are probably more so in that regard, and they are definitely what I call an active listen speaker. The Sonetto II, no surprise then, sound more subtle except in the treble. The Sonetto II have a more relaxed overall sound that is a deeper listen and requires less of the listener overall. The Sonetto II is a more musical speaker. The treble and mid-range are lusher and sweeter, and there is more subtlety to how the music is presented with more inner details. The 4309 are a little more brutal by comparison with some music, but you have to remember that is apparently what a studio monitor is supposed to be. The EVOKE 20 is still the bass king for output and extension, and the 4309 is similar to the Sonetto II for bass in that you are fine without a subwoofer, but likely better with one. But which of these three speakers do I prefer? Well, it would be nice to have a little bit of all of them actually, funnily enough, rolled into one, which obviously you can get, but that would cost significantly more. And I came into this review loving the looks, but do I love their sound as much as I love them as a speaker? Well, not with the system that I've been using for this group test. And overall their tuning is not exactly how I like it, but maybe that's because it's just not what I'm used to. But I am, being honest, still really drawn to this speaker with a will and desire to try and get the right system to try and make them really work for me. And I'm definitely interested to look at the 4309's bigger driver, bigger brothers. I think I can close out this review by saying that the 4309 is definitely not a perfect speaker, and it's unlikely to be the perfect speaker for every audiophile because of what it's designed to do and how it's designed to sound. But in terms of, I think, JBL, whether they've given us a studio monitor speaker here with the 4309 for £1,799, significantly less than the larger speakers from this range, well then yes, I do think that JBL have nailed it. But what I will be comparing them to next, one can only describe as being really in a class of their own, the Arendal 1723. So that is a review you're definitely not going to want to miss. So make sure you subscribe to the Pursuit of Perfect System YouTube channel, and obviously hit the thumbs up if you've enjoyed this review, found it useful and helpful. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.